Thank you.
I gotta turn up my speakers here. All right, we've got a couple here so far, and we'll sit here for a second and see if we get any more. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Good. We're so glad you could join us today, especially considering how weird everything is.
I know it. Well, welcome, as we say, to Brigadoon.
Glad to be here.
Yes.
All
It's
right.
actually still about a minute or two before 7, so we're still early.
Yeah, we're still good. I'm very excited because so far all of the buttons I hit did exactly what they were supposed to, which did not happen last week during one of our programs. We had to go into disaster mode, but it did work out. But so far, everything's working. Fingers crossed.
That's great. So can you?
That's not funny, mister.
I just thought I'd see if it was working.
Oh, that is a good one. Oh my goodness. So how are things going up where you are?
Well, good. We actually live in the middle of our own family nature preserve. So we're
Oh, that's lovely.
a 20-acre nature preserve, and then another 90-acre nature preserve 3 miles away, where the other our education center, the Indocuna Center, is located there. So
Oh,
we've
that's
got plenty of
amazing.
space to commune with nature, and the trees are very friendly.
I love that. We do. I have to say that is one of my favorite things about Bella Vista. We are very wooded. So my backyard goes directly into the forest, and you'll see little deer walk by, and of course this time of year you've got all the baby deer, and they're so
Oh,
cute.
yes.
Oh, they're little polka dots. They're so tiny.
Yeah, we have a friend named Chuck who comes and visits us.
My friend, she lives over on a lake, and she has a little groundhog named Dart, who has eaten all of her potatoes that she's planted.
Mm-hmm.
And her garden is suffering this year, but he's having a great time. So
Chuck is a little bit more of a problem. Should I tell you his last name?
please do.
Barry.
I
Beary.
love him. I love Chuck Berry.
Yeah, Chuck has been coming to visit us for about 5 years. Every year he comes through and takes all our feeders down and spreads them throughout the woods. So we have to take him in at night now.
Oh, that's too funny. This time last year, so full disclosure that I guess I will tell everyone on the internet now. I am a crazy cat lady. I now have 5 cats. Which was an unintentional thing. But last year, this feral cat brought 3 kittens to our house, and we already had 2. So we've got 5 cats in the house, and now feral mama lives on the back deck, and very spoiled. We built her a house. She gets food and water. She's living a very good life out there. I'm kind of jealous.
That's good. Yeah, we actually do wildlife rehabilitation, my wife Nicola and I. So
oh, really?
We rehabilitate things like squirrels and wild turkeys. And of our nature preserve, people are always coming to release animals that have been rehabilitated. Like last year, there were 3 porcupines, a possum, any number of rabbits, lots of things.
Oh my gosh, that's so much fun.
Really lovely spot. So.
All right, well, it is 6 o'clock. I know we'll have some more people trickle in as we go, and we are recording this, and it's also on our Facebook. I'm not sure if we can see everybody who's watching on Facebook from here, but we are recording this so people can watch it after the fact as well. So I'm ready if you are.
Sounds good to me.
All right. All right, I'll do my quick little introduction and say hi, hello, welcome everyone to our first ever virtual author event. We are very excited and slightly nervous because technology is not my friend, but it's working so far and we're cautiously optimistic. So tonight we have Joseph Bruchac here, and I have to say I'm very excited. I did an embarrassing little squealy dance when you responded to my first email. So I was very excited. So we are so happy to have you with us tonight. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here. And let me start off by giving us a little mood music.
Go for it.
Mwaikwai Nito Bak. Hello, my friends. De Louise Sosa, Alanoki Dahozi. My name is Joseph, or the Peaceful One. And I Salato Galana Bison Beak. I'm of the area called Saratoga in upstate New York, the Medicine Spring place, as we call it. And Alnoba Nia, a human being is what I am, as we say in Abenaki. Alnoba, we are all human beings. And those words I spoke to you are in the Abenaki language, the language of my family on my mother's side. It's a language we've kept in our family. My son teaches it. And it's a language that has a lot of depth and beauty to it. But then all languages do. And one reason I love being an author is that I've always had great love of language, of storytelling. You know, there are certain things about storytelling that I find to be true in the books I write and the stories I tell as a professional storyteller. And those two main things are this. First, a good story should be enjoyable to hear. But second, a good story contains within it useful information, lessons that can carry you forward, things that can help you on your journey. In fact, I always like to tell people that the cool thing about a story, if you tell it to a child, that child listens because the story is enjoyable and may not even know what the lesson is. It's so painless, but that lesson will come true later in their life. They'll find a place where they can apply it. Because, you know, one thing that's really true, if you tell someone not to do something, the first thought that comes in their mind is, haven't thought about doing that before. But if you tell them a story, they'll listen, and from that story, they'll gain understanding. Now, as a writer, much of what I do has to do with Native American culture. That's for several reasons. One, of course, is part of my own ancestry. But I was raised by my grandparents at a time when people did not talk here in the Northeast about their Native ancestry. In fact, my grandfather would always tell people who were outside of our family and did not know him that he was French Canadian. They'd say, well, why are you so dark skinned? Because he was very brown. He would say, well, us French is always dark. And that was the way he put it. But I was determined that I was going to try to tell the stories that he did not want to tell, to share the knowledge that I saw was lacking. I read a book about Native people in my library, and that book would always be, when I was a school kid, it would always be something which was stereotyped or inaccurate. So many stories that I've written are stories I wish I had when I was a child. In fact, one of my new books, which just came out, actually it's a series of 3 books, and I've got 2 of them here. It's called The Powwow Twins, that series. And each of these books has to do with a boy and a girl who are a brother and a sister, and they have adventures at powwows. They are Native American. Their grandparents are taking them to these different powwows where their grandparents are keeping a booth and they're selling things. You can see in the picture here that there are people dressed in all kinds of ways. Some are dressed traditionally, and some, like the drummers on the back page here, are dressed in sort of like t-shirts or sweatshirts, and others are dressed in regalia. And that idea of the powwow, which is a place where people can come and observe contemporary Native culture, should remind us of a couple of things. One is that Native people have not disappeared. They are here. We are here. And secondly, that like everyone else, we have things we can share. In fact, I think it's most important to see each other as human beings, whatever the color of our skin, whatever language we speak, wherever we come from, it doesn't matter. We are all part of that circle of humanity. And so in each of these books, I have my main characters, these 2 kids, solve a mystery. In this case, something disappears from their grandparents' table. It's been stolen, and they have to find out what happened to it. And then the new one that just came out a short time ago is called The Powwow Dog. And a mysterious dog shows up in this and creates a mystery. And the third one, which will be out in the fall, is called The Powwow Treasure. And these are illustrated by Dale DeForest. Dale DeForest is a Dene or Navajo illustrator, and he's formerly just done comic books. But now he's started to venture into graphic novels and into picture books. And this particular story is one, you can see how he has such a wonderful grasp of color and imagery, and it really has a friendly nature to it. It's an in-between book. It's like in between a chapter book and a picture book, and it combines the idea of the graphic novel as well. Another thing that I feel strongly about is that we need to be aware, very aware of history. History is important. If you don't know history, people will tell you things that are not true, and you won't know that they're falsehoods. The more you know, the less likely you will be fooled. And I think one of the great things about our native cultures is that we have so much history, and so much of it is not very well known to people. In fact, a novel of mine that I wrote and that came out about a decade ago, is still pretty popular. It's called Code Talker. And Code Talker tells the story of how Diné, or Navajo men, who had gone to government boarding schools and were forbidden to speak their own language. In fact, there was a period from about the 1880s until well into the second half of the 20th century when most Native American kids who went to school were taken from their homes and shipped to faraway boarding schools. Often they did not want to go there and would try to run away. And there they would be taught English, dressed in uniforms, and told to give up their culture and absorb Western culture. Well, the irony is that Code Talker is about a group of men who were asked to use the language they had been told to forget. During World War II, messages were all being sent by radio. And radio waves travel freely through the air. Anyone can pick up a radio signal. And as a result, even though they were trying to do it in code, often those were the enemies in that war of World War II. In this case, it was the Japanese Army and Navy in the Pacific theater of war. They would pick up those broadcasts, and they were very good at deciphering and breaking codes. So to create an unbreakable code, the Navajo language was used. And those Diné men, those Navajo men who had gone to school, learned English well, but never forgotten their own language, created an unbreakable code. It was such an effective code that it was continually used throughout World War II, in the Korean War, even in the Vietnam War, because until then, until much later in the 20th century, nothing had been invented that could do a better job and a quicker job of sending a coded message than the Navajo code. And that code worked in two ways. One, they spoke Navajo, but they didn't just speak directly saying what they were going to say in Navajo. Instead, they coded it. They used a sort of double code so that if they were talking about, let's say, a submarine, they might call it a whale. If they were talking about a torpedo, they might call it a fish. They're talking about a dive bomber, they might call it a sparrowhawk in the Navajo language. So they would do that. But also, even more difficult to break their code, they would do this. They would make up a word in Navajo. They would use, I should say, they would choose a word in Navajo for a letter of the alphabet. For example, for the letter A, they would use the word for ant. A in English is ant. But instead of saying ant, they would say wolachi. Wolachi means ant in Navajo. For B, they would say the word for bear, shush, which is not B in Navajo, but B in English. And so by doing this transposition, they were able to spell anything out or say anything that needed to be said, and things could not be broken. That code, in fact, there's an ironic kind of story connected to that. A Navajo man who was not a code talker was taken as a prisoner, and they wanted him to decipher the Navajo code, and they put earphones on him, had him listen. He said, "Oh yes, they're speaking Navajo." Good, good. What are they saying? It makes no sense at all. And as a result, they thought he was lying, and they tortured him. And he suffered throughout World War II, taken from one prisoner camp to another, treated very badly. And then finally, he was shipped to a prison that was located in a Japanese city on the mainland. And it was inside an underground meat storage locker. Fortunately for him, because the city he was in was called Nagasaki. And while he was in that meat locker, an atomic bomb was dropped on the city, and everyone inside that underground meat locker survived. Now, after World War II was over, he still did not know about the Navajo Code because all the Navajo people who were code talkers had sworn to never reveal it. It was one of the biggest secrets of World War II. And finally, when the code was revealed, when in the 1970s it was made public that this code existed, he found out that one of his best friends had been a code talker and he never knew it. So he went to the best friend's house, knocked on the door. When the friend answered the door, he said, "Because of you, I had an atomic bomb dropped on me." True story about the Navajo code talkers. One thing, too, I'd like to share with you is another one of our instruments. I played the flute to start off with, and the flute has a really beautiful sound. It has the sound of the wind, the sound of breath. I'll be right back and get that other instrument. And here it is. I had it sitting in the sun because it was a little moist today. And in the sun, the drum tightens up. And the drum is the sound of the heartbeat. We say when you hear the drum, it's reminding you of the first music you heard, because even before you breathed the air or walked on the ground, you were listening to your mother's heartbeat, that beautiful sound. And so we hear the drum, it reminds us of our mothers. You should always listen to your mother. And also it is said that the drum beat is the heartbeat of Mother Earth. So I'm going to play what we call a welcoming or a greeting song on the drum. And my two sons and I actually have our own drum group we used to perform with, and we run powwows ourselves, thinking of that series of books, the Powwow Mysteries. I've sold things at powwows. I have told stories at powwows. I have actually even emceed at powwows, and most recently, my family and I have been putting on a yearly powwow. Not this year, but next year we'll be back. So here's one of our drum songs. He go, Actually, that song that asked me to play it is a song we would usually sing before having a meal, giving thanks and acknowledgement and greeting to that food that is being shared with us. So I know it's getting close to dinner time out there, around 6 p.m. in the central area. So there is your call to dinner through the drum. I have a number of other books that I wanted to talk about, and one of them is part of a series that I was fortunate enough to be in with my good friend Adam Gidwitz. And this is a series of books that have to do with a professor and two kids, Elliot and Uchenna, and Professor Fauna. And what they do is they rescue mythical creatures. They travel around the world and prevent bad things from happening to all kinds of interesting animals. And this particular book, which we co-authored in the Unicorn Rescue Society series, is called Sasquatch and the Muckleshoot. And it takes place in the Pacific Northwest. And indeed, it is Sasquatch that they have to rescue. And the Muckleshoot are a tribal nation who are found in what is now called the state of Washington, not far from Seattle. And I worked very closely with the tribal language department and with the tribal historian to make sure that whatever I wrote and said was accurate and also was not objectionable. You know, very often people will write about a group of people and not know much about them except what they've read in a book or something they've heard. And I feel this is unfortunately true very often in books that are written about Native nations and about Native history and culture and people, that these books are written by someone who has a little bit of knowledge, but as Alexander Pope said, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Drink deep or not at all, because that little knowledge may be stereotyped, it may be inaccurate, and it may indeed present a picture of people that is so uncomplimentary that it really is hurtful. So anytime I have written something that deals with a different tribal culture than my own Abenaki people, or Abenaki as we'd say it in our language, I always consult elders, tribal historians, and linguists, people who can help me make sure I do things correctly. And that consultation really pays off because I'm able to very often find out things I never knew to be true. For example, in the case of this, I thought I knew something about the Lutchutsi language, which is the language family that Muckleshoot belongs to. A dear friend of mine named Vi Hilbert. Vi was a wonderful storyteller and an incredible elder, and focused on preserving the language as part of what she did. And I mentioned to the tribal language people at the Muckleshoot Reservation some of the things that I had learned from Vi Hilbert, and they said, "Oh, that's really good. I'm glad that you have learned that, but that's a different dialect." So Nancy Jo Bob, who was the Muckleshoot language expert, was really generous in coaching me and then going through everything we wrote to make sure it was completely accurate as far as our use of the language and what we said about Muckleshoot history and culture. I think that's really significant and important. Another book that I'd like to share with you in that sort of same vein is an older one in that it came out several years ago. And this is a novel for young adult or adult readers. I write for all ages. I write picture books. I write chapter books. I write novels for grown-ups. I write poetry for people of all ages. And this book here, which is called Brothers of the Buffalo, was published by one of my publishers, Fulcrum Press. Fulcrum did a series that I co-authored with Michael Caduno called Keepers of the Earth. That series, Keepers of the Earth, now has over 1 million copies sold. And interestingly enough, when we kept submitting our first manuscript for Keepers of the Earth, it got rejected again and again and again and again, more than 80 times. In fact, it was rejected so often that when it was finally accepted by Fulcrum, I almost wrote them a letter and said, didn't you really mean to reject this book, Keepers of the Earth? In any event, this is another newer one. And this book takes place in 1870s, and it is about the Buffalo War, when the tribal nations of the Southern Plains got together and tried to drive out the buffalo hunters. And what happened next is that the Army came in, and the Army, the primary people who were fighting the Buffalo soldiers, or the Buffalo soldiers, the ones who were coming in, the African-American men, often men who had been slaves, who belonged to the 10th Cavalry. And so the story goes back and forth between the point of view of a Buffalo soldier and the point of view of a young Cheyenne man. And I was really helped greatly in this by Cheyenne elders and by people who have worked in both of those areas with the Buffalo soldiers reenactment, and in terms of also understanding that these are stories that are very important to people. So what I did was I opened each chapter with either a poem or a story which came from African American or African or Native American, in particular Cheyenne culture. And Gordon Yellowman, by the way, was the person who helped me with the Cheyenne part of it. And I lived for 3 years in West Africa as a volunteer teacher and got to know many African writers. In fact, my PhD thesis, my advisor was Chinua Achebe, a very dear, close personal friend who was an incredible author. His novel, Things Fall Apart, I recommend to anyone who wants to know a bit about African culture. And also, it is written in a way that uses storytelling and proverb that I have always tried to emulate. I consider Chinua Achebe to be my mentor and was indeed, he's now passed on, a very dear friend. So this book, Brothers of the Buffalo, about the Red River War, is one I feel very warmly about for various reasons. I think it's also significant that when we tell stories, often people will ask us, where do our stories come from? And my stories come from many places, but I like to remind people, I do workshops for kids and other writers, that everybody has roots they can draw upon for their storytelling. I always say there are 4 roots. The first is ancestry. Who were your ancestors? What were the stories they told? What is the history they held? What are the songs they sang? There are so many things to find from your ancestors. And when I go to schools, I'll often ask kids, what's your ancestry? And sometimes it'll be double or triple or 4 times. You know, it'll be English and French and Italian and Cherokee. And I remember once one classroom I went into, and I was thinking, gee, these kids all kind of look the same. And by the time we'd finished going around the circle and talking about the various ancestries they had, there were more than 45 different ancestries. So ancestry, great place to turn. The second is your family. Everyone has family stories. I know I do, on both the European and the native side of my family. And think of how many novels are family story novels. How many things come out of family experience. The third thing is the place where you live or the places where you've been. Place is a great source of inspiration. And one type of place story that I've often told is ghost stories. Wherever you travel, you'll find that there are ghost stories, and those stories are really fascinating. For example, when I was in Ghana, my wife and I were traveling late at night in a passenger lorry, sitting up front next to the driver, who was a friend of ours. Everyone else in the lorry was asleep. It was very late at night. We're going along this road in Ghana that goes close to the Gulf of Guinea. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the road, there in the middle of that, a group of white figures stood up, and then the passenger van went right through them. They disappeared. My wife and I looked at each other. We weren't sure if we were just imagining it. And then the driver, our friend Joseph, looked over and said, did you see those ghosts in the road? We said, yes, we did. So we pulled up at the next roadblock. There were always roadblocks along that coast because there was a lot of smuggling. Ghana is in between Ivory Coast and one side and Togo on the other, and sometimes goods were smuggled back and forth across the borders. And our friend Joseph, the driver, leaned out and shouted to the soldier manning the roadblock, I wish to report ghosts on the road. And the soldier said, oh, those troublesome ghosts, they've been bothering traffic for a long time. You see, there had been an attempted coup in Ghana 3 weeks before that. And the men who attempted it were unsuccessful. They were sentenced to death, and they were executed right near that road. And ever since then, the soldier said, their ghosts have been there bothering traffic. But don't worry, he said, we have a priest coming in next week to take care of it. And sure enough, next week I read in the Ghana Daily News that a priest had come and done an exorcism and asked the ghosts, because they were disturbing interstate commerce, to continue their haunting 3 miles to the south, which put them out in the middle of the Gulf of Guinea. So there's one ghost story from my own experience that I often explain to people. That's kind of cool, how a ghost story can be. So many things can come out of a ghost story. I've written so many stories and poems that have that as a basis. Then the fourth thing that we all have is our personal experience. Those things that happen to us are great ammunition. In fact, one exercise I suggest is, what was the worst day of your life in high school? What was the worst day of your life in high school? Now write about it. And when people write about it, sometimes it turns out to be funny, sometimes it turns out to be very serious, but often when they tell that story, when you write that story, it no longer has the kind of power over you to make you feel bad, because telling a story is a great way to exorcise those things that trouble you. In fact, there's a story about Richard Wright, who was a famous African-American writer. wrote a great novel called Native Son. Back in the 1940s, though, he traveled down south to where he had come from. He was living in Chicago at the time with his wife. And while he was down south, a white man pushed him off the sidewalk and called him boy. Well, Richard Wright came back home, and he was feeling so upset about that, as his wife put it, he walked around the house slamming every door for about a week or a half. About a week and a half, he's slamming the doors because he's so upset. And finally, his wife said to him, Richard, just write the story. And he did that. He sat down at his typewriter. He began to write. He ended up writing a collection of stories called 8 Men, really powerful collection that came out of that bad experience that he had. I want to show you, before I offer you some time to ask me some questions, a couple of very new things. This is a mock-up of the cover for my newest book, which will be out in the fall. It's called One Real American, and it is a nonfiction book. It tells the story of Ely Parker. Ely Parker was a Seneca chief and also a brevet general in the American Civil War. One of his best friends was a man named Ulysses S. Grant, and he was Grant's personal secretary and traveled with Grant throughout the war. And boy, his story is such an inspiring story. I actually wrote a short novel about him called Walking Two Worlds, and this nonfiction book tells his story for middle grade readers. That will be coming out in the fall. And a good friend of mine, Cynthia Leidich Smith. I'll say that again, Cynthia Leidich Smith. She has a website or a blog called Sin, C-Y-N, Sations. And Cynthia is now editing a new line for HarperCollins. It is called Heart Drum Books. This is one of the first books they're bringing out. It is an anthology called Ancestor Approved, and they're stories from a powwow by different Native American writers from different Native American cultures. I have a story in here called Bad Dog, and this book will be out within the next few months as well. So take a look for that book, Ancestor Approved, and also for the Heart Drum series, which Cynthia is editing at HarperCollins. And one more thing I have to tell you about. Now, this is a novel of mine called Chenu, published by University of Oklahoma Press. And Chenu is a mystery novel for adult readers. My main character is a Native American detective named Joe Neptune. And the Chenu is a cannibal monster, and the story revolves around that. This book came out about 3.5 years ago. And I just finished for them a new book, and I don't have the cover, but I do have the pages for it. It's called Potascokes. And this is my newest adult novel. Potascokes is the giant snake, or something like the Lake Champlain monster. And I have a third novel in mind for this series, which also is about another one of our creatures called Gulugu. Gulugu is a sort of a werewolf. But that book from the University of Oklahoma Press will be out again later this year or early 2021. So there are a few remarks I thought I would share with you. And before I go further, I have to take a drink of water. And it's really important to be grateful for the small things in life, like water, the air we breathe. So I always try to remember to say, Rioni Nabi, thank you, water, before I drink. While I'm drinking, you can see if you have any questions you'd like to ask me. That water is from our own spring on our 90-acre nature preserve. So if there are questions, I am ready to take them.
Since I know we got a lot of, this is our first Zoom program, so for those of you who have not used Zoom before, if you mouse over on the screen, there should be a black bar that comes across the bottom, and on that you will see a Q&A feature as well as a chat feature, and we can see both of those. So if you have any questions, that's probably the best place to put them so we can see them. Since this is our first thing, we'll do a little tech time in the middle of it.
Okay, that's great. I could do a little advertisement too.
Yes, go for it.
I can hold this up. This is for our Indakina Education Center. That is the 90-acre nature preserve where my sons and I teach traditional skills, Native American language, outdoor education, and we have just reopened for outdoor programs with kids, being very careful and wearing masks and all that sort of stuff. So the Indakina Education Center, you can just go to Indakina Center or ndcenter.org and find it on the internet if you're interested in that.
We do have a question over on our Facebook page. Nadine asks, what tribe did you say you were from and where is it?
Yes, I belong to the Abenaki Nation, to the Nulhegan Band, and our registration, our travel registration is in Canada. That's where our travel headquarters are. Excuse me. We have Canada and Vermont, and my great ancestors came from the Canadian area, but our travel nation is in Vermont. Nulhegan Abenaki, Abenaki. And Abenaki or Abenaki means dawn land because we are Algonquin speakers from the extreme northeast of the continent. And the Wabanaki nations are 5 in number. They are starting close to the ocean, the Mi'kmaq or Micmac, the Maliseet, the Passamaquoddy, the Penobscot, and the Western Abenaki, which is our family.
All right, thank you. Let's see. Oh, we have people watching from Pittsburgh. That's interesting. Welcome, Pittsburghians.
I've been there. I've actually been in prison in Pittsburgh as a visitor. There used to be creative writing workshops at Western Penitentiary. And you know who was involved with that?
Who?
Fred Rogers.
Really?
Fred Rogers funded a visiting room for parents with children. And Fred was the sweetest man in the world. I remember when I visited him on his set, and he was just so friendly and kind. And then we're sitting together afterwards talking in his office, and he got a phone call, and it was from his wife. He said, "Oh, hello, Mommy. I'm here with the nicest man. His name is Joe Bruchac." And, oh, hold on. Yes, you want, okay, Mommy, let me write the list down. You need bread, you need milk. He's writing down the grocery list. I mean, Fred Rogers was so real. He was
Yes.
24 hours a day.
Yes. All right, do we have, okay, let's see. What comments we've got over here. I should have brought my glasses. That would have been smart. All right. I loved the biography of Crazy Horse. I loved learning about Crazy Horse as a child. Kids really could relate to the feelings that Crazy Horse had as a young boy.
Yes, actually, I have a Crazy Horse is a very interesting character. And I just wrote a graphic novel about Crazy Horse.
Nice.
Which will be out next year. It's being illustrated right now. And it's a part of the series that's his first, second books. And I did a lot of research, spent a lot of time out there. In fact, climbed Bear Butte, which was where Crazy Horse had his great vision, and met a number of people who were involved with that whole story. In fact, fascinating story. When I was out there doing a library program, I went out into the lobby, just to the outside of the lobby, where they had a soda machine. And an elderly Dakota man was trying to get the machine to work. So I helped him with it. Then he started talking to me. It turned out he was a direct descendant of Red Cloud, who was a famous Lakota leader. And he started telling me story after story after story. Just meeting someone in the lobby of a library. And you know, you never know when doing something to help another person or being kind will pay off in unexpected ways.
Very true. That's amazing. Let's see. How is the giant Crazy Horse sculpture progressing?
Well, it's partially done. You can see the arm and you can see the head of Crazy Horse, and the horse is starting to appear. But I have to say two things about that, including Mount Rushmore. One is that Mount Rushmore was a very sacred group of mountains, the grandparents' mountains. And carving them into faces was regarded as not a really great idea by the Lakota people. They still have problems with that. And Crazy Horse never had his image taken. He never had his picture drawn. He never had a photograph taken. And carving him out of a mountain, again, a mountain that has a very special meaning, seems a little bit inappropriate. In fact, what we did in my graphic novel about Crazy Horse, every image of him, his back is turned. You never see his face. So we make sure that we honor that wish that he had to never be portrayed in terms of showing what his face looked like. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I guess it's a matter of opinion. I don't try to tell people they're wrong about something. But as far as I'm concerned, I liked the mountains before they were carved into the likeness of human beings, whether presidents or great Lakota leaders.
Let me check over on Facebook real quick to see if we've got any other questions. Nadine asks, have you been to Pine Ridge reservations? Any comments about the AIM?
Two things there. First of all, I've been to Pine Ridge many times. And last time I was at Pine Ridge, they gifted me with a star blanket in appreciation of some of the work I had done. I wrote an article for National Geographic about around 1992 on the new face of Native America. And I talked about the water project, the Mini-Wiconi project at Pine Ridge and elsewhere where water was being brought from the Missouri River to places that had not ever had water of their own except water that was undrinkable. And when I was on the Pine Ridge Reservation on one of my trips, a very moving thing happened. In fact, I incorporated it into my new novel, Pataskokes. My main character sort of tells a story which happened to me. I was being driven around the reservation by one of the school bus drivers. And we went past a very small house. He said, that's where I live. There's 14 of us living there. Well, that house was like a little box. I said, wow, you have a big family. He laughed. He said, no, it's not all my family. There's only 5 of us. All the others are kids who wouldn't have any place to stay. And they were just living on the street. So I took them in. And to me, that was emblematic of a couple of things. One is that in our native cultures, we believe that sharing is important. You share to survive. As much as you give, as much will come back. But, a second thing is that I have discovered that often is the people who have the least were often the most generous. I've met a lot of millionaires and a few billionaires, and they're okay people, but they don't have the generosity of someone who, when you come to their house, will give you their bed to sleep in and sleep on the floor. And that is something that's happened to me. I lived in West Africa for 3 years. It happened to me numerous times there. I travel around to native communities. It happens to me there. So for me, it's a respect thing. You must respect every person as a human being. And remember, no matter what their station is in life, that's not what counts. What counts is what's in their heart and what's in their mind and what they do with it.
Very well said. Let's see. Oh, we've got another question. All the questions are coming in now. Did you ever meet Russell Means?
Yes, I have met Russell on a number of occasions. And I remember once I was getting on a plane and Russell was on the same plane, but he was in first class. So I just said, hi, Russell, and walked on past.
Kept walking.
But his son is actually a friend of my son, Jesse. My son, Jesse, is an expert in native language, in our Abenaki language, and has been a coach on things like, there's a show called Jamestown.
Oh, yeah.
He did all the language work for that and wrote some of the music for it. It was all filmed in Budapest. He spent his summers there. Mm-hmm. And Dennis Means' son is in that film and is a good buddy of my friend, my son, Jesse, good friend of my son, Jesse. So I have a connection to Russell's family in a couple of ways. He was a very interesting guy, Russell.
Let's see, any other questions? So far, I'm not seeing any others. If you guys have any questions, feel free to put those in the comments or the Q&A feature. Or if you're watching on Facebook, you can leave a comment over there as well, and we can get to those. We can sit in an awkward silence until they come in, or we can chit chat. I'm good either way.
Actually, I have another instrument here. This is a double flute, which has 2 chambers, so you can actually hear 2 sounds at the same time. One, the other, which is a consistent sound. So when you put them together, you get a really nice kind of
nice. We had somebody go, yay, more flute.
What I just played is a traditional Wabanaki song called Tutuaz. Tutuaz means the little ones or the children.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a song that envisions the white pine trees and how the white pines grow tall and strong, and underneath them are the small pines growing up, and the big pines are protecting them. Is what our role is as adults, to do the same thing for the next generations.
All right, Nadine, over on Facebook, I swear I can talk. What did you think of Dancing with Wolves? My Sioux friends thought the language was great.
The language was great, but there were two problems with Dances with Wolves. One is that the language coach was a woman, and there is a woman's form of Lakota and there is a men's form of Lakota. And everybody spoke Lakota like a woman, including Kevin Costner. So Lakota friends of mine have teased people about that. You're talking with a Lakota, a women's form. The second thing is that it is that old meme of the white guy comes in and is better at being an Indian than the Indians are. Yes. A man called Horse was like that. The Dances with Wolves is like that. And, you know, he's got to find the buffalo. No one else can find the buffalo except Kevin Costner. Oh, Tatanka. But, you know, I like Costner a lot. I think he's a great actor. But I do have my problems with Dances with Wolves in that respect. And my friend Wes Studi played the bad Indian in that and has played a lot of bad Indian roles since then. And I've heard different stories about the filming of that, which are very amusing, but I'll come to that another time, except to say one of the older films, a film called Cheyenne Autumn, came out years ago, had a number of, all the main parts in Cheyenne Autumn were played by white actors like Sal Mineo. Italians play a lot of Indians.
I wish I was shocked, but.
The Indians that they had in Cheyenne Autumn were real native people, but they were all Navajo. And when they spoke Navajo in the film, they weren't saying what the subtitles said. They were saying things like, wow, did you see that girl that the director was with last night? She was really pretty. Things like that. So there are a lot of in-jokes in the movies. I wrote I've written 3 books now about Jim Thorpe, the world's greatest athlete. Yeah. I did a film called Jim Thorpe, the world's greatest athlete on PBS, documentary film with my friend Tom Weidlinger. And Jim would tell these stories about working in the movies, which were hilariously funny. For example, at one point, he was working on this one movie set, and in the movie set, you had a group of Indians attacking a wagon train. And every time they fell off a horse, they get paid like $10. But the thing was that if a white guy fell off a horse, he'd get paid $20. So Jim Thorpe, who was a representative, went to the director and said, you know, we'd like equal pay for equal falling.
Yeah.
The director said, no, we can't do that. And Jim said, well, let me get this straight. Every time one of us falls off a horse, we get $10. And the director said, that's right. So they start shooting again, and they're riding around the wagon train, you know, the whole sort of thing. And this elderly little white lady lifts up her rifle and fires it, and every Indian falls off. And shortly after that, they changed the pay scale. That was Jim Thorpe's idea.
I'm telling you, you got to work around that sometimes. There are ways to do that. Okay, let's see. Does your nation have a tradition of the little people?
Oh, yes, we do. As a matter of fact, we have, I write science fiction as well as for kids. And I just have had another story published in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. Mm. And about 1.5 years ago, I had a story published there called The Next to the Last of the Mohegans. And I have a lot of friends who are Mohegan. They love that joke. So in it, the little people figure in. The little people are very important. And in fact, my friend, Melissa Fawcett Sayet, I think I've got the book right here. Melissa Fawcett Sayet Tantaquidgeon. She's had a number of different names, and she's also a wonderful writer. She and I wrote this book called Makiawisuk, The Gift of the Little People, which tells a traditional Mohegan story about the little people. And every tribal nation has stories of the little people. We have them in our nation, and I have written a number of stories in which they figure, but also I like to point out that we need to show them respect. And a lot of people think, well, we got to try to find something like Sasquatch, the Sasquatch hunters. My son, Jim, is a professional animal tracker.
Mm.
Teaches animal tracking and wilderness survival. And he was approached on 3 different occasions by the Sasquatch hunters, movies, films, TV series. And at every time he turned it down. He said, first of all, if I do this, people will think I'm silly. And second of all, I respect Sasquatch too much to bother him. And I think that's really important. And the respect for Sasquatch, the respect for the little people, the respect for nature is something we always need to keep in mind. Because when we go where we are not wanted, we can get in big trouble. There's a Beneke story about a man who really wanted to see the little people. And so what he did was, he knew they would come to this place on the river because you see little clay swirls where they supposedly made their pots at night. So he went to that spot and took his canoe and turned it upside down and hid under the canoe where they wouldn't see him. The next day, he didn't come back to the village. By the way, this is a story that I was told by Stephen Laurent, Atian Lolo, an Abenaki elder, a very dear friend of mine. The man didn't come back to the village the whole day. So they went to look for him. And there was his canoe turned right side up, but the man was nowhere to be seen. But then they noticed there was a big mound of clay, about 7 feet long and about 3 feet wide. They came over to it, and there was a little hole in one end of it. And they leaned over, and they could hear a voice saying, "Help, help me." And they broke open the clay, and there was that man. They brought him back to the village and asked him what happened. He said, well, in the middle of the night, all of a sudden, I saw all these little eyes, and then the canoe got turned over, and that's the last thing I remember. So he never went to look for the little people again.
I think I love that point. It is very important to respect. Respect is a very important thing that I think sometimes gets forgotten a lot. Let's check over on Facebook. All right, no new questions over there. And let's see. All right, does anyone have any other questions for Joseph? While we wait.
One thing I have been doing is live streaming for our Indakina Center. So every Monday and Wednesday at 1 p.m., you can actually see me on live stream on our Facebook page.
Oh,
so
nice.
Just go to Indakina Education Center and Indakina Education Center right here on Facebook. And you'll see me, my son Jim, my son Jesse. Each of us are doing live streams of various kinds. And I'm doing music and storytelling twice a week.
Nice. We can share that over on we'll share your page on our page so everybody can find that later on.
By the way, this was the brochure for our Saratoga Native American Festival, which we do on a yearly basis, but not this year. And it has a lot of information in it about the local tribal nations that are part of our culture here. Here's the Nulhegan Band of the Abenaki Kawasuk, which is my band, my particular tribal nation. And then there's the Mohegans, the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois. And these are all things that were written by members of those tribal nations who come to our festival and wanted to contribute that information for the general public. So if anyone is interested in getting a copy of this, they can always try email me. My email is pretty easy to find. Just look under my website, josephbruchac.com, and you'll see my email. You found me.
I did. I got very excited. I said, I was trying to do the positive thinking of, well, this year has been kind of different for everyone considering everything. And so we were going online and I realized, I don't have to try and find someone local this year. I can get the people I want. So I was very excited to find your email. Let's see, I think we had a question over on Facebook. Nadine asks, have you met Sherman Alexie?
Sherman is an old friend of mine. Sherman has had a lot of trouble lately, and I'm sad about that because apparently there are some accusations of sexual abuse in his background. And whether or not it's true, I can certainly say this about Sherman. I've known him a long time. He's a magnificent writer. And I think that we sometimes have to separate the writing from the person. because if you were to judge someone purely by their personal life and the mistakes they've made, you might never read anyone's work. And Sherman and I were doing a program together about 4 years ago, and he got up to do his part of the program. He said, "I'm glad Joe Bruchac is here because he's the reason I'm a writer." I'm going, "Shut up, Sherman." Say that, Sherman. The reason he was saying that is that I did an anthology. It's called Songs from This Earth on Turtle's Back. This is actually over 30 years ago, of Native American poets. And Sherman read that book, and he'd never thought about the idea of being a poet himself, and that Native American people could be poets. He said it really inspired him. It sent his mind in a different direction, and he did a great job with where it went. I think his book, Part-Time Indian, is absolutely true autobiography of a part-time Indian, is a really wonderful book. And I recommend Sherman's work. And as I said, his work deserves to be remembered, and I hope it will be.
All right, we have a few questions over here. Sandy asks, could you talk about visions? I'm thinking about black elk.
Yes, actually, two of my picture books, the story of Crazy Horse and the Crazy Horse's Vision, and my little picture book about Sitting Bull, called A Boy Called Slow, both talk about how they gained their names by having visionary experience. And it is true throughout Native North America, in most of our tribal nations, that seeking a vision was extremely important. At a certain point in your life as a young person, a young man or a young woman, perhaps at the time when you're moving from adolescence towards adulthood, you would go and in a particular place far removed from the community, you would maybe on a hill or maybe in a pit, you would sit without drinking, without eating, and you'd be there day and night for several days until praying or crying for a vision. And that vision came to you, it would give you guidance on what might be important to happen in the rest of your life. It might give you a name, it might give you a song. And the thing about visionary experience is it's not a joke. It has to be taken very seriously, and it has to be done with a proper assistance. One of our traditional stories here in the Northeast is about a young man whose father was desperate for him to have a good vision. And so he sent him out too early. He was supposed to start only after the ice is broken and after the snow is left, but he sent his son out too early to get the vision before anyone else did. And he made him stay there day after day and night after night. And the boy kept having visions, but none of them were good enough for the father. And finally, after 4 days or 7 days, depending how the story is told, the father went there and the boy was gone. He heard a voice and he looked up. It was a bird singing in a tree. It was a robin. And the robin said, "I am the one who was your son. You made me wait too long. And now, from now on, no one can come to go for a vision until they hear my song." And the bird flew away and was gone. Now that reminds us that this is something very serious and to be respected again. And I know a lot of people who've done things like vision quests who are not Native. They've done sweat lodges. They've done all kinds of things that are very trendy. And sometimes people get hurt as a result of it. So I would urge people to be very careful about this and to recognize that when we are dealing with a traditional way of doing something, our traditions go back hundreds of years, if not further. They're the result of much experience and much knowledge. And we made mistakes and found the right ways to do things as a result of making those mistakes. So you don't need to make those mistakes. Go to people who understand and know what they're doing. And I would also urge you, do not pay someone for vision or for sweat lodge experience. It's not supposed to be a money thing. You don't do this for money. Medicine people will tell you they do what they do for the medicine itself, for the people. And if they're given a gift, that's great, but they don't do it for money. Money is a curse in many ways within our culture. We make money be the most important thing. Although as a good friend of mine, Dewa Senta, who was the clan mother, the head clan mother at Onondaga of the Eel clan, Dewa Senta said to me, "There's nothing wrong with money It's just that the wrong people usually have it.
I think she's onto something. Oh, that's funny. Okay, let's see. We had one more over here. Stephanie says, thank you for interesting stories and the flute and drum playing. And then
you're welcome.
Doc C says, does New Age equal cultural appropriation?
Unfortunately, it often does. What we call New Age is often just a rewrite of something that already existed. For example, now people are talking about deep ecology as if it were something new, but that's the way indigenous people have lived for thousands of years. Or the idea that, that whole idea that, oh, the trees communicate with each other. And the trees, well, guess what? We know that. We knew that a long time. So when you are dealing with these ideas, and often connected to making money and to creating someone as a guru, someone who is, you know, I've had people come to me and say, I understand you are very wise. What can you tell me? And I usually say, go home. Don't ask me. In fact, I had someone at a powwow years ago when I was running a booth come up to me and say they wanted to learn traditional medicine. I said, well, I can't teach you that. But I do know some people who are medicine people who need help. And if you would be willing to volunteer and work for them for free and go there and live with them and help them out over the course of a few months or a year or two, eventually they'll start teaching you things. And this person said, well, I'm actually looking for a weekend seminar. And my response was, life is not a weekend seminar.
No. Let's check over back on Facebook. All right, no questions over there. Let me make sure. Oh, yes, there is. Hold on. Nadine asks, have you heard of the book Return to Wounded Knee?
I don't have a copy of it, but I have heard of the book. So I can't talk about it because I don't have it. But I have a lot of friends who were at Wounded Knee. I know a bit about Wounded Knee, and I'd be interested to see that book.
Let's see. My cats are talking now. Doc C asks, your thoughts on Carlos Castaneda? Is Doc C trying to cause problems?
Carlos, little Carlos. There are a number of problems with Carlos Castaneda. One is that much of what he's done was plagiarized from other people. There are descriptions of events and such things as you know, walking on a waterfall and all that sort of stuff. And it was taken directly from someone I know who had done a movie called the Peyote Hunt of the Huichol Indians, and had studied with the Huichol people. And then the second thing about Castaneda was three things. Number two, you cannot translate the words that they're supposedly saying in Yaqui into English. It doesn't work. They're using idioms that don't exist. For example, at one point, Don Juan mentions kicking the bucket, and Don Gennaro says, you know, something following that metaphor. Well, there's no metaphor for kicking the bucket in the Yaqui language. That's totally English. And there are places again and again in the book where it's written where supposedly people are making references and saying things that are totally within a European context, yet they're supposed to be Yaqui Indians. Third thing, a friend of mine taught at the same university where Carlos Castaneda taught in California. And one day, my friend, I won't mention his name, was walking past Carlos's office, and he heard the sound of a typewriter going like crazy. He thought, well, that's strange. Carlos is supposed to be in Mexico right now doing more research on his next book. And he looked inside the door, and there's Carlos Castaneda typing away. My friend said, Carlos, I thought you were supposed to be in Mexico. And Carlos said, I am. Shut the door.
All righty then.
There's a fourth thing too, and this is very unfortunate. The whole thing about using peyote, people read those books and they decided they were going to go out and get peyote and eat it themselves on their own. And as a result, peyote is a plant that grows very slow. A king peyote bud about this big might be 50 or 100 years old. And my friends who were in the Native American church, like my friend Lance Henson, who's a Cheyenne dog soldier and a poet, wonderful guy, and has been a roadman in the Native American church. pointed out that many places, peyote's almost been wiped out by non-native people coming and harvesting it because they read Carlos Castaneda and wanted to get high like he did. And by the way, you cannot smoke dried mushrooms. It doesn't work. There's a couple of things there that are dangerous, stupid, and don't work. But anyway, I do have a few thoughts on Carlos Castaneda.
Doxy promises he was not trying to cause trouble.
Oh, that's okay.
Let's go back over to Facebook. Not seeing anything new on Facebook for questions. Go over to our Q&A tab. All right, it's 7 o'clock. We'll do one last call for questions. If you have been dying to ask something this whole time, now is your chance to do it. So we'll give you a little bit to ask those. And while we are waiting on those, I just want to say thank you again, Joe, for coming to do this.
Yeah, sure.
The travel must have been terrible. The traffic must have just been awful to get to.
It was hard. Getting from here to my desk is taking forever.
I know. I find in the mornings, the walk from the bed to the desk is just
exhausting. It's exhausting.
Too much. All right. Well, yes, I want to thank you again for coming to support the Bella Vista Library Summer Reading. We really appreciate having you here and taking the time out of your day to join us. And I want to thank everybody who tuned in.
Big thanks.
That is lovely. Well, thank you to you two and to everyone who's come to watch and everybody who's watching this after the fact. We appreciate you guys hanging out with us this summer, even though it's been a little strange. So thank you again. It's been a lovely evening.
Great. And this can be found on the Bella Vista Facebook site, or where can people find it?
We're going to have it on the Bella Vista Facebook page, and be on the lookout. We're also going to share Joe's Education Center page on there as well. We do have a YouTube page, but it is an antique, but it will be on there as well.
Okay,
so
great.
On our website and Facebook page.
Okay, well, everybody, Ulipam Kani, travel well, and Uliuni, thank you.